Hi there, everyone. It looks like we are live and on all the streams that I want us to be on, kind of, sort of, you know how it goes. So welcome, of course, to DEI Speech IQ. I'm hearing myself in echo as usual because I don't know what I'm doing. Cheers to Taryn Malcolm, who has said yes to me to come on DEI Speech IQ. Cheers to Dr. Malcolm. Thank you again for coming on. I know there's a couple of people on LinkedIn, and hopefully we'll get a couple more people. And again, just because, listen, hey, you are a popular person. I want people to know you and get to know you better. And I am glad that we were able to do this today. So yeah, welcome. I see you're in your office today.
I am in my office.
All right. Are you excited about the new school year that's coming up? Remember, students might eventually listen to this.
I actually am. I like the beginning of a new school year. I feel like it's a nice fresh start. You get to meet new students. We get to do new things. No one's heard my jokes yet. So it's really a great time to start some new material. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And recycle the old material. Exactly. Absolutely. So let me put my arms back down. So thank you again for saying yes. So we are hopefully being recorded as I'm on this, and making sure that I'm getting everything right. But of course, the most important thing is, who are you? So I know a little bit about you, and of course I put out your brief bio, but tell us how you got here. How did you get into speech pathology? And how have you worked in the profession so far?
Yeah, so I got into speech pathology sort of indirectly. I had, big hopes. I was going to be a doctor. I was going to, cure cancer. That was my big dream. And then I got to school and I realized chemistry and I weren't friends. So since being a physician would require multiple chemistry courses, I wanted to pick something where I could work in a hospital, first with kids, which is really funny if you know me now, all of the adult courses. So, yes. So I switched into speech pathology when I was at St. John's. And I started working out of school at St. Mary's Hospital for Children. So working with kids in a hospital, which was my dream. And after St. Mary's, I moved to Brooklyn at Kingsbrook Jewish Medical Center. It was a really wonderful experience and had a lot of varied experience there. And then moved to a subacute rehab in Queens at the Grand. It used to be called Queens Center for Rehab. The name changes, but the place stays the same. And around that time, because of my time working, I really wanted to go back to school. So I went back for my doctorate and I finished, and now I'm here at Mercy University. Yay! Newly minted Mercy University.
Correct. Exactly. Exactly. What was your undergrad study in then?
It ended up being speech pathology. At first it was bio, and then I switched.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got you. So at least they caught you at the, in undergrad. So that's good.
They caught me just at the right time. Yeah. And,
absolutely.
And actually quite nicely, my first semester as a speech pathology student, one of the professors I had, Nancy Yang, ended up being one of my mentors through my doctoral program. So that was really nice.
Cool. Very cool. Exactly. So it works out. It all works out somehow.
Yes.
So, and now we're together working. So it's even worked out even better for you. No, I'm teasing.
It has. Okay. So now I get to see you all the time.
So, God knows all the time. Other than when your kids, of course, come and get you and they're like, enough already. Stop talking to anybody, everybody. So you did talk a little bit about, of course, the type area of work that you are doing currently, or that were interested in, and how you're working towards. I actually want you to just add a little bit on your research, because I think that people would be interested in that as a little, intro also.
Well, so for those that don't know, probably most people, unless you've read my dissertation, which that's 5 people. My research is in morphosyntactic cross-linguistic influence in Jamaican Creole English speakers, and I'll decode that. Basically looking at how being a bilingual speaker, having your 2 languages influence each other in terms of grammar, right? And so we wonder why, people who are bilingual can never sort of achieve native-like proficiency in grammatical structures. And I looked at that in Jamaican Creole English bilingual speakers. I'm calling them bilingual speakers. I know some people won't like that, but that's what the literature is telling us. And I like to promote bilingualism as a positive thing. So,
Yeah.
and actually what is really nice is that, or what I really got into that work for was my client. When I was at Kingsbrook, I had several clients, and my students have heard me tell these stories 100 times probably. But I had a client, and quite frankly, I made a big error, and I assessed him using a assessment tool from the United States, and he was from Jamaica, and he had had a stroke on the airplane and came straight to the ER. And he didn't answer any of my questions because they were so culturally inappropriate. He blank stared at me. And, as soon as I went home, said, this was a totally inappropriate eval. I need to go back the next day and fix it. And so I did. And so I came up with a lot of examples of different tasks related to the other assessment, but I made it very culturally specific to Jamaica. And he did wonderfully. And I was able to change his eval right before rounds with the physiatrist. So that was great. But
Absolutely. So that is great. I am just not ignoring you, but just making sure that we are connected as best as we can, because there was a little cut off and that might be on my side. So I'm making sure that I am getting us on a hotspot and not and not messing up our link here. So the next question is about DEI Speech IQ specifically. So this is called DEI Speech IQ. So I do like to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. When do you feel that you first determined that you needed, or we're realizing, so to speak, let me put it that way, that there was a disparity in diversity, equity, and inclusion, or any aspects of those? Yeah. In our field,
certainly in graduate school, but when someone lectures to you about it and you don't experience it, it doesn't really hit home the same way. Okay. But in my first job at St. Mary's, I was first doing home care in Queens and then in the Bronx. And I feel like there you really saw it. I mean, clinicians didn't want to go to the Bronx. They didn't want to go to certain areas. Definitely saw disparity in the types of services people were receiving, or based on, cultural and linguistic barriers, access to care. And that sort of made me upset. I remember saying to someone, they said they would never do home care in the Bronx. And I said, people in the Bronx don't deserve speech. I was like, that's not fair. So especially at St. Mary's, when we're treating very small, very sick children, right? So, and then of course, when I moved to Kingsbrook, I really saw it, particularly as it related to languages and language varieties, socioeconomic status. Kingsbrook is the kind of hospital that anybody can, like most hospitals in Brooklyn, anybody walks in and they're in your rehab. So, I saw a lot of professionals making a lot of errors. And I think one of the best things that I learned when I was at Kingsbrook, because we had a large SLP department that was quite diverse, which I think I'm really fortunate to have been a part of, is that one, we could learn from different SLPs about their clinical expertise, right? Like someone was really good at trach and vent, someone was really good at peds, someone was really good at brain injury. But I could also learn from people of different cultural backgrounds, right? So we had people who spoke various languages from various cultural backgrounds. So if you were sort of stuck, you had someone like a cultural broker or a linguistic broker you could ask, and they were right there. But even in a setting like that, I saw many, many mistakes, and sort of made me want to do something about it. And so, like I said, that's what sort of inspired my doctoral work, because I just felt here's this group of people that I know people who are Jamaican, and I'm related to people who are Jamaican, and there are not appropriate methods to assess them or to treat them. And I didn't really feel like that was equitable. That really is not fair. So.
Right. So I hope I didn't mess up your answer on LinkedIn and on social media, because my internet was weird. So I'm going to make you co-host just to make sure.
Okay. No problem.
In case I messed that up again. But all right. So I agree. That's one of the things that we actually don't learn a lot about is, or enough about, I should say. And especially back in the good old days, we definitely did not learn any of those things as far as assessment or even really considering the assessments. It wasn't until after grad school that I learned about, for example, the DSLT, which is dialect sensitive language test. And then since then, there's been the DELV, I want to say, which is, I don't remember what DELV stands for, but I feel like it's language variety.
Language variety, yeah.
Language variety at the end. So I guess I'm trying to, so basically, and that's just, so to speak, for non-standard English speakers, whatever the standard is, of course. Right. And so over time, there, as you said before, some people may or may not appreciate those, and yet we still don't get any enough, I will say, exposure to, some variations of our tests.
I would even say too, like the DELV is an excellent example of a test where a lot of effort was put in to make it as appropriate for all different language varieties. And there are still areas of the test that can be culturally inappropriate for certain groups of people. And I think that's one of the challenges. And I think that might be why certain researchers or clinicians sort of steer away from bilingual topics or bivarietal topics, because there's so much variability. It's hard. And people don't like doing things that are hard always. It's much easier to take a homogenous group of monolingual English speaking children and standardizing something. And, we find this, a lot of my work is in bilingualism and bilingual aphasia. And, no two people are the same. So we end up doing a lot of case studies, and, I think it makes it a little bit harder, but I think it's, when you pull all of that information together, you can see a lot of trends that can give you good information and can help you understand that, no two people are the same, even if they are from the same background. And you really have to be a good clinician and do a really good or really strong dynamic assessment to get a diagnosis. And I think, some people are really pushed in terms of, time in their jobs to do this cookbook evaluation. But it's not really doing a service to anyone, especially those from diverse backgrounds.
Right. And that's true, because some are in some ways entrenched in, meaning that the system is entrenched in using particular standardized tests or whatever the version is, formal testing. And they've used those for so long, they feel that they have a good, establishment of those criteria, and they're like, ready to do that one. But the other ones are like, oh, we're not really sure about this and whether it works. And then it's harder to find the resources to kind of follow up with that. So it's important that we, continue to talk about whether or not, frankly, they are easily accessible, which is part of that. That they are kind of understood well, as far as whether or not they have been, I would say, properly explained, especially to our students, when we're talking about students, especially. So going into the field, that you know about it, that you're familiar with it, that you know that there's options. I would say the same thing about, accent modification. There's some pushback, and there's some, some people that embrace it, and then there's some people that push back. Coming from a background of immigrants, I know that there's always a need for people to be well understood and to communicate effectively. Now, how that comes about can be a variety of different ways. Right. There's not one way. So, being able to kind of know which one to go to is probably influences the students for us as professors.
And I think that brings up a really good point. I think as professors, particularly in classes like diagnostics, like introducing that, hey, this is a great test, but this test was normed on only American people. Most of them were white, right? Yeah. Or like, for example, the Boston diagnostic first was only normed on men, right? So, I think when you teach the classes and you teach how you get these standards, and really talk about it in a thoughtful way, you can introduce other tests. And I think that's one way we can do it. And I think too, there's a strong responsibility that needs to be put on clinical educators and externship placements. People take students at externships, and I love them. I always took students at externship, but I really thought of it as a big responsibility. Like, I'm their teacher. They don't know how to do this, and I'm teaching them how to do this, right? So, like teaching them how to make materials accessible if they speak another language. Finance comes up and drops off the list of documents they need to apply for Medicaid, and it's in English, but they don't read English. They only read, they're Serbian, right? That was a client I had, right? Yeah. So who's going to translate that for him? Is it within your scope? Kind of not really, but what are you going to do, right? It's not fair. And so there are ways that you can do that. And as like an externship supervisor prior to coming here, I really tried to take that on as a responsibility and not thinking of my students as sort of like my helpers, but rather like I'm trying to teach them something.
Right.
So they can be a good colleague later on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Actually, you brought up a very good point around diagnostics too. And one of the things that you probably don't do enough of is talk about how interpreters or translators are used in the diagnostic process for those times where we don't speak Serbian and we don't know anybody around us that speaks Serbian.
Well, Dawn, if you were in my bilingualism course this past summer, you would have learned about it.
I am glad that is part of what you talk about, hence the reason why you are here, because you understand that we need to make sure that we are explaining that in the comprehensive way and a consistent way. So yes, I did evaluations, which of course I did not do, let's be clear, joke not joke, but Tagalog, just Pashto. I live in Queens. There's all kinds of languages around Queens. So when I'm doing early intervention, when I was doing early intervention evals,
it was everything.
Yeah, the grandparents and the parents all spoke a different language, and the child needs an evaluation. And they're like, no, you could do it in English. And I was like, can I though? Does that even make us, does it make it worth
and that's the thing too. There's preference, and then there's family preference, client preference. But, someone said to me, like, how could you do bilingual therapy and you're not a bilingual therapist? That the number of languages, particularly in Queens and Brooklyn that I used to see,
right.
I would have to speak 12 languages to get by. And so you sort of learn the basics and you know who to ask, right? So you surround yourself with a network of people and you get a good interpreter service and you do the best you can. And if there is someone who speaks that language, happy to pass them off, right? Pass the client off to a bilingual therapist who speaks 100%. Their language. But a lot of the time that just doesn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, which goes back to our recruitment. But I don't want to get so back off of we actually are looking forward to having a very diverse student body this semester, God willing. Right. And so actually one of the students is Filipino and will be speaking Tagalog. So I'm excited about that. We'll have one. We'll have one that we can refer to. So
I have more.
Yeah, there's more. There's always, well, there's a couple more. Let's be clear.
Yes.
So again, for those that are in, if ever, in the area and, need to reach out and say, by the way, I speak another language, let us know, because we will
Yes.
definitely refer to you,
Yeah.
and call you in. So thank you for all those reminders. Has your perspective on diversity changed since over the years, or is it pretty much, and how has it changed?
Okay. Has it changed? Yes. How has it changed? I think pretty greatly. I mean, I think, and I feel like this might be true for a lot of people. It's really easy to think from your own perspective. We always teach about theory of mind. I know that's a hot topic in our department. From my own shoes, I'm this person, right? And things are a certain way for me because of my background. And, we talk about this in terms of like, was grad school easy for you? How was it getting through grad school? How was it getting a job? And, I didn't have any trouble, but I also come with a certain set of privilege, right? I'm a white woman. My parents both went to college. I was never told I couldn't do it. I was never in severe financial, distress that I had to stop. I didn't, a lot of variables that could have happened did not. So I think at the beginning, I was kind of naive, to be totally honest. But I think what has been really helpful is that as I had a really strong graduate school education, and I had professors who talked about this way back a long time ago when I was in grad school. So I thought about it a lot. And then, as I was saying, when I worked particularly at Kingsbrook, in a department full of women, and at one point, one male SLP, I would like to point out, which is another diversity issue. Everyone was sort of from a different background. We had, being bilingual was really important, particularly in Brooklyn. And so I think that made me more, it made me more aware of differences. It made me more sensitive to the challenges. And I think, like many others, each year, as I learn about new things that could be technically considered as something negative or as a microaggression towards someone else, and then I'm like, oh, have I said these things in the past? I'm mortified now for myself. But I think instead of just sort of sitting in that, you can just say like, okay, you didn't know, you made a mistake, now that you've learned from it, you keep going. And I think too, surrounding yourself with the right kind of people. When I started doing my research in Jamaican Creole, I went to the Society for Caribbean Linguistics. Shout out to them. They have a conference every other year in a Caribbean country. So if you love the Caribbean, you should go. And when I was there, that's when Caribsha, the organization I'm involved with, Caribbean Speech and Hearing Association, some members reached out to me, said, you're an SLP and you do research in, a Caribbean Creole, you should join our group. I said, okay, sure. And from there, I've had like research collaborations, guest speaking invitations. And so I think if you surround yourself with people who are a little bit different, but share very similar values than you, I think you can learn a lot. And I think being open to hearing ways that you can improve yourself is important.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. None of us know it all, and we can't assume that we do. We have a cultural identity, and we potentially have our own DEI perspectives. And yet we can always learn more. And I think that that's definitely one of those things that, well, as you said, listening to others, and not just listening, but taking action. So once again, that's one of the reasons why you're on here. It's not because you've just listened, it's because you've also taken action. When we put those two things together, then we get a better opportunity, frankly, to be more culturally, for ourselves, humble, course, so cultural humility, and then for us to be culturally responsive as far as what we're doing with our clients who may come from different also perspectives. So again, whatever those perspectives are, and not even centering any one particular type of culture, not even your own, in that process is really, very hard, not very hard, excuse me. It's hard for us to unlearn and then do the next thing, do the better thing, so that's the part that I'm going to say. I agree with you. All right. So, do you have a specific vision that you would love to see as far as CSD and the way that we work? Is there something that you're like, if this happened, I would be extremely happy?
Yes. I mean, I think it's like, several years out, but quite honestly, I think and I know this gets brought up a lot, and I actually think maybe Vicky Deal Williams also said this. I think there should be more diversity in the field. I think, and I talk about this with our students, their skill set as someone from their cultural background and their linguistic background is so important, because all of those people exist, right, in society. So all of those people one day will need services. And some people really want to see someone who is like them, treating them, understanding them, right? And, I think, graduate school is hard. It's not something that everyone can do, but I think everyone can if they're given enough opportunity and support, right? It's such a small percentage of, the population has a master's degree. I think at one point someone said something like 20%, which is very small, right? And so I think we as a field, in my mind, if we sort of stopped gatekeeping and sort of opened things up. I know everyone has talked about that. It's moving very slowly.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yes. I really think we benefit. As I said, some of the best lessons I've learned have been from my fellow clinicians who were not from my background. And quite frankly, I really enjoyed spending time with them and learning about them, because when I hear someone who's exactly like me, that's a little bit boring because I live with me every day. I want to hear about something new and fun, right? Your perspective is so new and fun, and someone else's is so new and fun. And, I had asked some of our students at one point, at any point in time, I shared this with you, Dawn, before, had anyone told you were not cut out to be a speech pathologist? About a third of them said yes. And I was like, well, here you are in graduate school. So to them, so I think if it's something that you want to do, there are people who will support you. And I think there are more people who will support you than you think. And for the people who don't support you, to them too. So that's the nicest way I can say that. But I think try to, that would be my vision, to really make it more welcoming and diverse. I mean, if we look at other health professions, they're much more diverse. Look at nursing, look at PT.
Yeah.
We're the problem.
I wonder why that is, but we again, we don't have a lot of time to discuss.
No, that's a longer conversation.
we have our limited amount of time, so we're going to keep it as brief as we can. But thank you. Yes, I would love that too. I think that there's, of course, movements towards that, and I think that there's I would say, I have to unfortunately say, blips on the screen, because we have to see whether or not it's sustainable and whether it's long-term and whether it's something that continues beyond, affirmative action being decreased across the board in universities and colleges, if that really plays out. I hope it doesn't. I hope everybody continues to realize and understand the importance of affirmative action, or just programs that bring in diverse students, really, for these fields, so that it's not a battle of why are we saying it this way? Why are we, approaching students in these particular communities that we don't have to anymore? And
I think too, when you think about it, when you take a step back, right? you and I were talking about this yesterday, but barriers to admission for people of color, people from any non-male Caucasian background, right?
Yep.
There are huge barriers like standardized tests, like letters of recommendation, like
Yes.
interviews. So, is affirmative action is not really giving them help. It's like taking down the wall that you put in front of them. And so I just don't understand. I know that as a field, or at least as a field of, upcoming SLPs, as a group, we're trying to make admissions more equitable. At least the people I've been talking to. Maybe I've only been talking to the people who are doing it. But I only surround myself with like-minded people sometimes,
Correct.
and that sometimes is a problem, because then I think everyone's doing it the way that I'm doing it, or that we are doing it really. And it's not perfect, and it takes time and tweaking and, what's the right way to do it. But we're trying. And I think, like we said, once you learn something and you keep trying, and you just keep trying to do better, that's all you can do.
Right. Each day a little bit better. Each day you learn the lesson that you didn't know last time, which is what you said, like when you're naive, when you're caught up in the work, right? Like all those things. You just kind of say, okay, well, I can't be caught up so much that I can't do better tomorrow. Yeah. And I can't be, I can't have learned something today and continue to be ignorant to that particular piece of new information. So, for those reasons, continuing to be critically aware, frankly, of what we're learning and making sure that we take time to reflect. Those are things that, we try to teach our students as often as possible. And I think that as a professional in the fields, the professionals try to do that as often as possible. Yes, there's a paycheck attached to it. And yes, that's necessary for life, period. Right. But there's also, I think a lot of people come into this field because they're good people and they want to do good. So that is, that's hopefully the foundational version.
And I think of it that way. If you're a good person and you came into this field to be an SLP to help people, then help people the best that you can. Right. And learning about certain things about yourself and, biases that you might have, or, 10 years ago, I really made a mistake by saying X. I'm just never going to say it again. And, if I slip up, I'm going to apologize. And, I think that's okay. I think as also too, certain approaches evolve, right? So I think I can think of this as a really great example, gender affirming voice therapy. Less than 10 years ago was not called that. They used terms like transsexual and transgender, which we would never use now. And so I think, we've learned that terminology. We've learned new strategies. We've learned not to say, make your voice more feminine. We've learned to say instead, we'll try to make your voice lighter and brighter, right? Or other descriptive words, right? So we have the capacity to learn this, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think this can apply to many areas, right? And I think sort of it goes through phases of like popularity. Like this is very on trend to be up to date. 10 years ago, no one was asking what your pronouns were. And now my pronouns are in my email. So I think,
and then your Zoom link.
And in my Zoom link, yeah. And so, I think, when you take these small steps, it makes everyone feel a little more included. And I think, the I of DEI, there you go. I buzzed that right in. But it also sort of takes the burden off of individuals to be like, okay, like we're accepted here, or this person gets it, or even just, they don't really have to wonder about how you view something. So because you've taken that burden off of them.
Right. And the other part is, back to beyond being a student, is that we are now required to have cultural humility training on a regular basis as part of our own continuing education, including ethics, big part, and cultural humility. And so I feel that that is going to probably give a lot of people a little bit more of a boost of their, you know, really judging themselves, right? So reflecting back to what am I doing? How am I doing it? And making sure that I'm, you know, that I'm learning what to do next. So we all can benefit from that. So I think that that's really a good part of it too.
Good and long overdue, right?
It is long overdue, and unfortunately, you don't know what you don't know until you're faced with apparently COVID-19 and George Floyd, and who else knows? I mean, don't get me wrong, we shouldn't have waited that long. Please understand.
No,
but being that we did, the fact that those things propelled us forward greatly is at least something that can be said for our particular field. So I think that that's a great thing.
I also think, though, that many clinicians were doing that kind of work unknowingly sometimes. Okay. So I can give a great example of this. So
tell us.
My collaborators and I gave a 2-hour talk at the New York State Conference in 2017 and an hour talk at ASHA in 2018 on Caribbean English Creoles. Our New York State talk, first of all, a 2-hour talk, a doozy of a time, right? Sitting for 2 hours and listening to us speak. We had a packed room. And so it was very specific to New York State. It covered, basics of Caribbean Creoles, Caribbean English Creoles. And we had a large group of people from upstate that said, hi, we have all these students, in our community that are Guyanese, and I really just want to service them the best that I can. And I saw this talk, and so I wanted to come. So the clinicians are there, and they are trying their best. But I feel like when it's only out of necessity, right? Like now I have this student, instead of learning about it in general all the time, I have 6 students now, and I know that this is inappropriate. Right. So I need the resources.
Right.
So and I appreciate that. And they reached out and they sent emails. And so, you can take, and I did that talk with my research collaborators, Dr. Lindsay Nurse and Dr. Telford Rose. So, but I didn't want to leave them out. Like I was giving the talk myself.
Absolutely.
I was not.
Absolutely.
But, I think a lot of clinicians do want to do this work, and they can do this work, and they've been doing this work. But I think there's more to learn. And, like anything else, you do something when it's required. I hate to say that. But it's a good incentive. So I think, the more you can learn and the more you can apply it to what, the populations that you're working with, not everything will apply to everybody, and that's okay. But it's okay to learn about it, even if you only have one student who's Jamaican in your school or one adult on your caseload, and you just want to know something, right?
Right. But one of the things that you said specifically was that you were giving the presentation. So you were providing more information and tools, right? Yes. So you were a resource. And that's part of what I'm, as far as, having resources, having people to talk to, having collaborators, having support in what you're doing. Yes, it's the one student that, I taught in Flushing schools. I should have done way more of this. Not that, frankly, I had a lot of Asian students, but the point is, I should have at least been kind of looking more into that in that time. But unfortunately, I was so entrenched. Actually, I was in grad school at the time. I was so entrenched in kind of like the things that people were telling me in school, not in a bad way, but in the sense that like I wasn't looking for more than that. I was looking for what I needed to do in that moment, and that was it. So again, I think that this is something that's going to stretch people out of their comfort zones and make them really reconsider how they are dealing or interacting with their clients. So,
and I think a lot of my examples are with adults, but I was at Clinical Aphasiology this past June, and Yasmin Faroki Shah gave a nice presentation about, the Boston naming test and, how bilingual Spanish, English, bilingual speakers were not scoring the same as monolingual English speakers, right? And so, I never really thought about that. And then she presented it because I went to this conference. I was like, oh, that makes so much sense, right? Yeah. So I think plug for conferences. I know they're expensive, but even free, talks, reaching out to people online. There are a lot of good online resources.
Yeah.
I think it's important. And, the information is out there. Sometimes it's hard to find, but if you can find somebody or you can ask around, there are several people who are doing this work.
Absolutely.
And there are many organizations, even within ASHA or within your state organizations, that are working on it, right? So we have all the different caucuses in ASHA.
Yes.
I plugged Caribsha before, and
Yes.
BOSLA is another great organization, right? So, these types of organizations have the resources or can connect you, right? Maybe, Don Cotter-Jenkins doesn't know, as much about Jamaican Creole, but I have 3 friends that do, right? And I can give you their emails, right?
Right.
So I think that's important too. It's just to connect and remember that, like, if you email me about Jamaican Creole, I will gladly talk about it.
Well, on that note, we've actually run out of time, but I want to ask the last 2 questions. But one of them on that note is, how can people contact you or connect with you if they do want to collaborate with you or work with you or just ask you questions?
Sure. So I think I'm linked to this LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn is there.
Yes.
I don't check it every single day, but I usually get notifications. My email, you can email me at Mercy University, tmalcolm4, and that's the email that I get all the time. So that's a great way to connect with me.
Yes,
anything like that.
at mercy.edu.
Correct.
I want to make sure people know exactly how to get to you. So our last question. So this month, last day of August, which, as I've been saying, is a milestone for me. And last year, this time, I was getting ready to start at Mercy what was Mercy College, and now new year will be Mercy University. Woo-hoo.
Wait, in your new role as core faculty member and clinical director.
Yes, new role. So this is the next chapter. But August is also Black Business Month. And so the question of the month is, what Black business would you recommend to anyone in the audience?
Great question.
Black owned business, excuse me.
Perfect. Yes.
Sorry.
So actually, one of my collaborators and friends, Keisha Lindsay Nurse, just started the Responsive Clinician, and they provide CEU courses about how to be a responsive clinician, how to be culturally competent. And she gives talks, and they have online resources, and they're just launched their website and they're building it. So plug to Keisha. I love Keisha. And you should check her out at the Responsive Clinician. I believe they have a website, and I believe they have an Instagram. You want to check that out.
Right. Excellent. So definitely a great resource, especially based on what we're talking about. And yes, a lot of people love Keisha Lindsay Nurse. So feel free to check her out and support her business. Again, I want to say thank you so much for saying yes to coming on DEI Speech IQ, as sponsored by World Class Speech Services. So Dr. Malcolm.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers to you. Thank you again. I look forward, frankly, till I see you again, which will be
in a couple of days. Yeah.
Exactly. A couple of days. Again, thank you to the audience for checking us out, checking in with us, and hopefully we will do this again sometime in the near future, one way or another. But definitely check out DEI Speech IQ every time I can post, and every time I have a great guest, I will definitely put it out there. So thank you again. Appreciate you. And actually, I also appreciate you on a personal note for welcoming me to Mercy College, now Mercy University. And again, thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Take care.
All right. Bye.